I am Riley, 31 years old, a senior financial strategist, and I never imagined that my own mother would publicly humiliate and physically assault me over money at my sister's engagement party, no less. One moment, I was standing near the dessert table, trying to maintain composure, as my mother Angela made yet another manipulative comment about how my big shot job should make contributing to my sister Brielle's wedding a no-brainer. The next, I was drenched in scalding coffee. It hit my face, neck, and chest like acid burning through my dress and scorching my skin as gasps echoed around the backyard. Guests froze champagne flutes suspended in midair as my mother screamed, "You have ruined everything just like always." I stumbled backward, soaked and trembling, humiliated in front of dozens of relatives and acquaintances. I heard someone whisper my name as I tried to wipe my face, only to feel more pain and disbelief. It was not just the heat of the coffee that stung, it was the years of being treated like the family ATM, the cold calculations of a mother who never once defended me, and the realization that I had always been a means to an end in her eyes. Brielle stood off to the side, unmoving, her mouth open in shock, but said nothing. Not a single word to defend me. That silence burned deeper than any physical injury. Then, just as my knees threatened to give out, Aaron walked in. He froze at the sight of me, my soaked, blistered skin, my eyes swollen with unshed tears, my mother still standing there, wild-eyed and righteous. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulled me into his arms, and then turned to my mother with a fury I had never seen before. "You threw hot coffee at your daughter over a wedding," he asked, his voice calm but lethal. "It was an accident," she lied with a sneer. That was when Aaron revealed everything: the mortgage payments I made secretly, the loans I paid off for Brielle, the quiet sacrifices I endured so my family would not fall apart. And still they betrayed me. That was the moment I realized something powerful: I was no longer their victim. I was done. And this was only the beginning. The moment the coffee hit my face, it was not just my skin that burned, it was every memory of being unseen, unheard, and unchosen. As Aaron shielded me from the stunned crowd, I could hear the voice of my childhood echoing like a cruel chorus. "Why cannot you be more like your sister?" That question had been the soundtrack of my life. While Brielle danced through her adolescence with C grades and cheerleading trophies, I had buried myself in textbooks, striving for perfect grades, flawless attendance, and invisible approval. But no matter what I did, Angela, my mother, had only one daughter she adored, and it was never me. I was the utility, the achiever, the one who could be counted on, not for affection, but for results. That favoritism was not subtle. It was baked into every dinner conversation, every school conference, every family photo where I stood on the edge while Brielle posed center frame. My father, Greg, never intervened. His silence spoke volumes, always standing behind my mother's decisions, his discomfort with confrontation outweighing his role as protector. He was the type of man who promised to paint the house every summer and never did, who said he loved us both equally, but never once called out Angela's cruelty. And Angela, elegant, cold, image-obsessed, had grown up with nothing and vowed never to feel small again. So she poured all her hope into Brielle's beauty and social charm, convinced her golden child would bring them the status she had always craved. Me, I was the utility bill, the background noise, the future lifeline to be guilted into funding everything that made her feel relevant. She never said, "I am proud of you," not when I made the honor roll, not when I won scholarships, not when I graduated early with a degree in finance. Her compliments were laced with poison. "At least your job has benefits, or maybe one day someone will want to marry you too." She only valued me when she needed something, and she always needed something. I stopped seeking approval long ago. I started building a way out. I applied to colleges in secret, worked 3 jobs, and clawed my way to independence. But no amount of success could shield me from the emotional residue of being the lesser daughter. That is why the coffee did not just hurt. It shattered the last illusion I had left. It made everything crystal clear. My family did not just neglect me. They weaponized their expectations, and when I failed to deliver, they tried to destroy me. But now, everything is different. The silence is broken, the truth is out, and I am finally free to tell my story. If you have ever been made to feel like you were only valuable when you gave, please know you are not alone. Share your experience in the comments and subscribe to this channel so I can keep telling the stories that need to be heard. Comment your experience and subscribe to support more stories that give voice to betrayal, resilience, and truth. College was not just my escape, it was my rebellion. After years of being told what I was allowed to want, where I should apply, and how I was expected to shrink so Brielle could shine, I finally made a choice for me. Angela had plans, of course. She insisted I attend community college to save money I would later learn had already been mentally allocated to Brielle's bright future. But I had other ideas. Late at night, while she was obsessing over Brielle's prom dress fittings or gossiping about the neighbor's daughter's engagement, I was filling out applications to top universities. I did it in silence behind closed doors, because I already knew what would happen if I asked for permission. And I was right. When the acceptance letter from Columbia arrived with a partial scholarship, no less Angela's reaction was not pride. It was fury. "Who is going to pay for this?" she hissed, waving the letter like a threat. "We have been saving for Brielle's tuition. You will just have to be realistic." That was the moment I realized I had never been part of the plan. I was the backup, the one expected to settle sacrifice and silently make do. I stood my ground for the first time in my life. "I will pay for it myself," I told her, even though my stomach twisted with fear. And I did. I worked in cafes, cleaned office buildings at night, and gave up sleep to survive. Every dollar I earned was earned twice, once in labor and once in sacrifice. While my classmates joined clubs or traveled abroad, I calculated rent versus textbooks and mastered the art of saying no to anything that cost more than $5. There were nights I cried into a bowl of instant noodles, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, wondering why no one in my family thought I was worth investing in. But through that struggle, I became something no one in my family ever expected me to be: free, independent, unapologetically mine. When Brielle dropped out of community college in her second semester and moved back home to find herself, Angela called me with a smug kind of grief. "Well," she said, "at least you have a stable job." She had no idea I had just landed a competitive internship that would launch my career. She never asked what I wanted. She only wanted to know if I could cover Brielle's car insurance just for a few months. I paid it. Quietly. Because even then, I still thought I could earn their love. But now, after the engagement party disaster, I see it for what it was: a system of emotional extortion dressed up as family. A system that punished independence and rewarded dependency as long as it served her vision of perfection. I escaped the first time through sheer grit. Now I know escaping once is not enough. You have to stay gone. You have to stop proving your worth to people committed to never seeing it. And that is exactly what I intend to do. After college, freedom came with a price tag, but I paid it gladly. I graduated with honors, a finance degree clutched in one hand, and student debt in the other. But I also had something far more powerful: clarity. I knew I could never depend on my family for support, but I could depend on myself. That knowledge was both exhausting and exhilarating. My first job was entry-level, but I negotiated fiercely, leveraging my internship experience and the connections I had built from waiting tables in high-end restaurants where CEOs and investors casually dropped advice between sips of Merlot. I learned to listen. I learned to ask the right questions. And most importantly, I learned to stop apologizing for being ambitious. Within 2 years, I moved from analyst to advisor. By 5, I was managing multi-million-dollar portfolios for Blackwell Partners. My name was on the door. My salary was in the high six figures. And my life finally was mine. I bought a modest condo overlooking the lake and drove a sensible hybrid sedan, not because I could not afford more, but because I had grown up watching Angela equate love with luxury. I knew better now. What no one else knew, what I never told anyone, was that I had also inherited $75,000 from my grandmother Nora, the only person in my family who had ever believed in me unconditionally. She had been a bookkeeper back in the day, when women were expected to stay quiet and make casseroles. She saw my fire and fed it with wisdom and encouragement. Do not let them clip your wings, she would say on our Sunday calls. That inheritance became my silent springboard. I invested it wisely, turning it into a private portfolio that would become the backbone of my wealth. It was also the source of the mortgage payments I secretly made on my parents' house when Greg lost his job and Angela refused to downsize. She never knew it was me. She thought it was some extended loan restructuring. I wanted to help, but on my terms. I even paid off Brielle's student loans again anonymously. I told the loan officer to let her believe it was part of a forgiveness program. I did not want their gratitude, I just wanted peace. But instead of peace, I got entitlement. Every time I gave, they asked for more. You have such a good job, Angela would say, like it was a license to siphon off my success. Brielle would text me from designer boutiques, asking for a small boost until payday. And every time I said yes, a small part of me vanished. But I told myself it was worth it to keep the family together. That was the biggest lie I ever believed. Looking back now, I see it clearly. What I thought was generosity was really a desperate attempt to be seen, to be loved, and no amount of giving could fill the hole their favoritism had carved into me. The problem was never my career. It was their refusal to respect the boundaries that came with it. I did not owe them my financial security. I owed it to myself, and soon I would finally learn to protect it. The engagement party felt less like a celebration and more like a trap carefully set and perfectly baited. After years of quiet giving and invisible sacrifice, I should have known better. Angela had been calling more frequently in the weeks leading up to the event, her voice sugar-coated, but every sentence looping back to Brielle and her whirlwind romance with Chase. They are so in love, Riley. It is like a fairy tale, she gushed. Except this fairy tale starred a jobless actor with a trust fund barely holding up his expensive loafers. Chase was charming, yes, but in the way con men are. I saw it instantly in the way his eyes scanned my wristwatch and ring before he even asked my name. Still, I kept quiet. I wanted to believe this party was about love, not leverage. But as I stood in the living room, looking around at the newly renovated furniture and fresh paint, funded no doubt by money no one in the house had earned, I felt something tighten in my chest. Greg offered his usual awkward hug at the door, and Brielle squealed like we were still teenagers, sharing secrets, instead of decades of unequal treatment. For a brief moment, I almost convinced myself to just get through the weekend. Then I overheard Angela and Brielle whispering in the pantry. She will help, my mother assured her, not even bothering to lower her voice. She always does. That is when I realized they had not just hoped for my help, they had counted on it. The 7-tier cake, the Parisian designer dress, the 3-week honeymoon in the Maldives, it had all been planned as if my bank account was theirs by birthright. And when Brielle stood before the crowd later that afternoon, thanking our incredibly supportive family for investing in our dream wedding, I knew I was being publicly cornered. Then Angela raised her champagne glass and added, "With a little help from those who love you most." The message was clear. They were not asking. They were announcing. I tried to slip away to collect myself in the bathroom, where I splashed cold water on my face and reminded myself that I could say no, that I was not obligated to bankrupt my values or my savings for someone else's fantasy. But Angela found me. She always does. She pulled me into my father's study and gave her pitch polished and manipulative. 50,000, she said, as if it were a perfectly reasonable favor. When I refused calmly and firmly, something in her broke. She called me selfish, ungrateful, heartless. Her voice rose, echoing down the hallway until guests began to gather. But I stood my ground until she snapped. Until the coffee. Until the burn. Until the humiliation boiled over in front of everyone. I had been willing to endure years of dismissal, quiet betrayals, and subtle digs. But in that moment, they made one mistake too many. I would never be their backup plan again. They had weaponized my love for them, but I had just begun to reclaim it for myself. And this time, I would not be quiet about it. The moment that coffee hit my skin, it was like years of silent tolerance combusted all at once. The heat of it was nothing compared to the sting of betrayal that spread through me, not just from my mother's hand, but from everyone who stood by and did nothing. But what hurt most, the moment that gutted me, was Brielle, my sister, the one I had protected, supported, and sacrificed for in ways she never even knew. She stood frozen, her hand over her mouth in theatrical shock, but her silence screamed volumes. Not a word, not even a step in my direction. It was not concern in her eyes. It was embarrassment, fear that her party might be ruined, not that her sister was in pain. Then, Chase, the unemployed fiancé, slithered to her side like a villain out of a bad soap opera and had the audacity to smirk. I saw him whisper something in Brielle's ear, and her expression darkened like I was the villain for not keeping the peace, for not writing a check and pretending everything was fine. But the reckoning had arrived. And it came not from me, but from Aaron. He stepped into the backyard like a thunderclap. His voice, steady cutting, exposed everything I had worked so hard to keep private. The mortgage payments, the student loans, the secret contributions. One by one, he laid out the evidence of my love that had gone unseen, unappreciated, and unapologetically exploited. I wanted to stop him, to pull him back, but I could not move. I just sat there, soaked in coffee and shame, watching the people who claimed to love me crumble under the weight of their own lies. Greg, my father, the quiet bystander, finally spoke, his voice quivering as he asked if it was true. I nodded. The look on his face was not just shock, it was guilt, maybe even grief. Then came the final betrayal. Chase, with that artificial smile, looked at me and said, "Perhaps we could talk privately about investment opportunities." I almost laughed. Even after the truth was exposed, even with the burns on my face still red and raw, he saw me not as a sister-in-law, but as a bank, a stepping stone, an access point, and Brielle. She barely blinked. She had tears in her eyes, sure, but her voice was more accusatory than apologetic. "You let me think you were broke," she said, as if my financial discretion was the betrayal, not her entitlement, not her silence, not her complicity. That is when I realized the depth of the rot. It was not just my mother. It was a system they all upheld, one where my value depended on what I gave, not who I was. So when Aaron pulled me to my feet and said we were leaving, I did not look back. I did not say goodbye. Because they had already said it for me in every decision they made. The mask had fallen. The show was over. And if they thought I was dangerous before they were about to learn what happens when the quiet one finally walks away for good, we left without a single glance behind. Aaron's arm around me was the only warmth I felt as we drove away from the house that had never truly been home. My face throbbed from the burn, my dress clung to my skin, and my chest ached with something far deeper than physical pain. It was the ache of finality. In that backyard, with the white roses and champagne flutes and hollow toasts, my family showed me who they really were. And I finally believed them. At the emergency room, the doctor confirmed what Aaron had feared: first-degree burns across my cheek and neck. Not deep enough to scar, but a mark nonetheless, one I would carry invisibly long after the skin healed. While the nurse gently dabbed burn cream onto my face, my phone lit up like fireworks. Dozens of messages poured in, some pretending to be concerned, others masked as curiosity, and a few so absurd they made me sick. Aunt Lorna wanted to talk investment opportunities. Chase messaged me 3 times, asking if we could still have that business chat. Even Brielle left a voice note sobbing about how her engagement party was ruined and how I could have handled things better. But I did not answer. Not one. I handed my phone to Aaron and whispered, "I can't." He nodded and turned it off without a word. That silence was a gift. That night, Aaron booked us a suite at a lakefront hotel. He drew me a cool bath, ran his fingers gently along the edge of the bandage, and treated me with more care in one night than my family had shown me in years. As I lay in bed beside him, his steady breathing grounding me, I realized something important: I had been living 2 lives. In one, I was the competent, composed finance partner with a sharp wardrobe and sharper mind. In the other, I was the overlooked daughter begging to be seen, feeding a machine of guilt, manipulation, and conditional affection. But the coffee had changed everything. It was violence, yes, but it was also clarity. The next morning, I booked an emergency therapy session. My therapist, Jillian, listened without judgment as I recounted the party, the coffee, the exposure, the silence that followed. Then she looked at me and said something simple but seismic. What your mother did was assault, Riley. And what they've done for years is emotional abuse. That word abuse landed like a stone. I had tiptoed around it for so long, calling it tension, or dysfunction, or just how families are. But now I could not unsee it. I did not cry during that session. I felt something else rise inside me, instead resolve. I made a list. Not of revenge, not of retaliation, but of boundaries. Real ones. No more secret payments. No more guilt-wired calls. No more pretending. I would not attend another family function just because it would mean a lot. I would not bankroll their denial. I owed them nothing. And for the first time, that truth felt like freedom, not loss. I had been the quiet one for too long. Now, I was the one who walked away and meant it. ChatGPT Jean Noi, freedom, as it turned out, was not loud. It was not some triumphant declaration or cinematic exit. It was quiet, consistent, and deeply intentional. In the weeks following the engagement party, I stuck to my list. When Angela showed up at my office building demanding to be let in, I had security walk her out. When she sent flowers the next day, an extravagant arrangement with a note that read, "Families fight, but always forgive," I threw them in the trash. There was no apology, just a veiled command to resume the roles we had always played. I give, she takes, and we call it love. But that role was retired. I was done performing. Greg, to his credit, began to step forward in small but meaningful ways. He called me alone without Angela on speaker and said what I had waited years to hear: I should have stopped her. His voice cracked, years of regret trembling at the edges. I enabled it all, Riley. I thought staying quiet was keeping the peace, but it was just letting her hurt you. I'm so sorry. It was not everything, but it was a start. Madison's response came in waves. First defensiveness, then guilt, and finally the truth. She showed up at my office 2 weeks later, insisting she did not know about the mortgage payments or the loan forgiveness. I believed her, but then she asked, "Why didn't you tell me you were rich?" And that was the problem. Even in her apology, there was a hunger behind her eyes, not for connection, but for access. I told her that wealth was not something I used to define myself, that I had kept it private because I wanted to be valued as a sister, not a bank account. She nodded, but I saw the flicker of disappointment she could not hide. Still, something in her began to shift. I watched it happen over the next few months. As I continued therapy, laid low from the chaos, and returned to work with sharper boundaries, Madison canceled her wedding. She moved out of our parents' house, rented a one-bedroom apartment, and got a job in event planning. She even called once just to say, "Thank you, no strings, no hidden requests." Then, one afternoon, she arrived at my condo with a small velvet box. "It's not much," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "But it's something old and borrowed. Grandma's bracelet. I think she would have wanted you to wear it at your wedding." I stood frozen, the bracelet resting delicately in my palm. It was the first moment that felt real between us, not performative, not transactional. Just two sisters trying to find their way back to each other. My wedding to Aaron remained unchanged, same date, same lighthouse on the coast, same simple dress I had picked out long before the drama exploded. Only now, it felt like a reclamation, not just a celebration. My father would walk me down the aisle. My sister would stand beside me, not because she earned it, but because she was learning. Angela would not be there. I had offered her a chance to come on one condition: acknowledge the harm, apologize, and respect my boundaries. She refused. And that too was a gift. One less mask in the room. The morning of my wedding arrived with a calm I had never known. The sky above the Maine coast was a pale blue, soft clouds drifting over the lighthouse where Aaron and I would say our vows. As I stood in the keeper's cottage, adjusting my veil in front of the antique mirror, I caught my reflection and barely recognized her. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. I no longer carried the weight of proving myself to people who had no intention of seeing me. Alicia fluffed the train of my dress and grinned. "You're glowing," she said. I smiled not from nerves or fantasy, but from the quiet power of truth. I had walked through fire literal and emotional, and I was still standing. That I thought is the real glow. When my father knocked and entered the room, there was no grand speech, no dramatic confession. Just a man ready to do better, holding out his arm and saying, "Shall we?" It was enough. As we walked toward the ceremony, Madison appeared in her sage green bridesmaid dress, eyes shining. "You look beautiful," she said, and it felt real. She had changed not perfectly, not completely, but enough to earn a place here today. She was trying, and for the first time in years, trying felt like something I could trust. The ceremony was exactly what we had dreamed, intimate, honest, no forced traditions or fake smiles. Aaron looked at me like I was everything he had been waiting for, and I looked back with the same truth. When we exchanged vows, it was not just a promise between partners, but a pact with ourselves to never again abandon who we were, to meet someone else's expectations. As we danced under the canopy of string lights later that evening, I watched Madison laugh with Aaron's cousin, not for status, not to impress, but simply because she was learning how to be herself. My father gave a toast, quiet but heartfelt. And there, amid people who chose to be present, not out of obligation, but out of love, I felt something rare peace. Still a part of me looked to the horizon and wondered if Angela would ever change. Madison told me she had started therapy, that she might be trying. But that was not my weight to carry anymore. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would not be rushed or expected it would be earned. And maybe, just maybe, not offering immediate forgiveness was my final act of self-respect. Some doors need to remain closed, not out of spite, but because healing sometimes means walking away and never turning back. What I know now is this family is not defined by blood, but by behavior, by consistency, by the spaces where your soul can exhale. I spent years being punished for having boundaries. Now I build a life within them. This is not just my story, it is a story for anyone who has ever been made to feel guilty for choosing themselves. If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel. Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear today.